So let's make a bench hook. This is just a small bench hook. I'd often recommend that you make a small one and a large one. But when you're dealing with small components, this is ideal. It's basically a flat stable board. You can use MDF or plywood. I've actually used a piece of pine, but it's very close grained, it's very old and very stable. And attached to that are two pieces of hardwood. I'm using oak, and they just produce a fence on the end of the board on either side. And the difference between the way I make a bench hook and the way you'll find commercial bench hooks is that I make a bench hook which acts either for Western or for Japanese sawing. So either on the push stroke or the pull stroke. The way that that works, if you look at it carefully, on this one face the fence is over to the left hand side and the board runs through on the right hand side. Now if I flip it over, you'll see on this side the fence starts on the right hand side and carries over, and then the board runs through on the left hand side. Now what this means is when we put it on the bench, if we hook the one side against the bench this way round, I have a gap for sawing on the right hand side, and would use that, or a right handed person would use that for a Western style saw, so it supports the work as we cut on the push stroke. Now if I flip it over in this direction and place it on the back side of the bench and pull it towards me, it's now in the optimum position to hold components for sawing on the pull stroke with a pull saw, Japanese saw, etc. Another advantage of creating it this way is that used the opposite way round, so with the fence over at the right hand side and hooked on the opposite fence, we can use it with a small block plane as a shooting board. I'll talk about shooting boards in another episode, but if you've heard about them before you'll know how useful they are. So how do we make this? Well, I've cut a board. I'll tell you the dimensions of this one in case you want to copy it. It's not crucial. This one's 7.5 inches, which is 19 centimetres, by 5 inches, which is 12.5 centimetres. Just happens to be 15 millimetres thick, which is about 5/8 of an inch. The fences are 1 1/8 inch, which is about 28 millimetres, by 16 millimetres high, which is again about 5/8 of an inch, and they're 4 inches long, 10 centimetres. The only fixing I have for these on here is glue. I'm using white PVA glue. I make sure the surfaces are nice and flat and clean. Apply the glue and then clamp that either with a G-cramp, a couple of G-cramps, or in a vise, and leave it for a good 12 hours. And I won't use it for at least 24 hours. And I've never had one of these fail on me at the glue joint. So I'm going to make an identical one of these because they actually work very well in pairs if you've got longer stock to deal with. I've got the rest of the board that I made this first one out of. If I pop those together and butt the ends up, I can mark for length. It's not that crucial. You can be a millimetre or two out and it won't really worry you when you're working with them. When you use two together, they're normally spaced out 2 or 3 feet apart to deal with the longer stock. Take my square. I'm going to knife a line across at the correct length. Grab a chisel and just make a little notch against that knife line. Something to put my saw into. Once you've prepared your blocks, we'll glue them up using a tri-square to make sure they're nice and square with the board and making sure it's flush on the end as well. I just apply the glue onto the back of the block. And I just spread that around a little bit by moving the block in the corner. Now that's going to be very slippery to try and clamp, so I'm just going to add a couple of grains of sugar on the block. They'll easily press into the pine and they'll stop the block from moving around. So flush it to one end, square it up, press down, and then we can put a clamp on. Double check for square. That sugar's held it nice and firm. Don't squeeze all the glue out with the clamps. And we'll just leave that now to dry. I'll leave it a good 12 hours, or I'll leave it overnight tonight in the clamps, and then I can flip it over and do the one on the other side. Once the first fence is thoroughly dried, you can flip it over and glue the second fence. I usually find it easier to use a little block underneath so I can keep it all parallel with the bench for clamping. Using the bench hook with our slim bench is very easy. I definitely suggest you use it in the length of the bench because it won't move at all. Because we've got a slim bench, if you use it across the face, there's a chance that you'll get some wobble on there. So for best use, put it up against the end of the bench. To make a cut, just place your wood up against the fence. You can line, if you're looking for a square cut, you can line your saw blade up with the end of the fence, which we cut nice and square. And you see the hook provides plenty of support whilst you're sawing on the push stroke. It's also useful if you're doing some chiselling work. Easier than putting it in a vise or clamping it to the bench. Just holding it in the corner of the hook there frees up both hands to use the chisel. Cleaning into the corner of a joint, for example. If you're wanting to use it with a pull saw, then working off the end of the bench, you may find a problem with Western style pull saws. Western style pull saws often have handles that sweep down, a bit more in the Western style, and so you'll find if you're cutting parallel to the bench, the handle's going to hit the bench. Not a problem if you use Japanese style, which has a straight handle coming out above the level of the teeth, so you'll be able to use that perfectly alright and cut right the way through. If you're working with a Western style pull saw, which that hooks on, we put the work against the fence towards ourselves, but because the bench is slim, it will wobble a bit, or it's likely to wobble a little bit. So I like to put one foot on one of the lower levels of the pallet, my knee against the top level, and I can brace the work against my knee. That holds it nice and firm. Last time we left our little box having rebaited the sides so that the ends would be set in, and our base now didn't fit within the box. And I said there was a better way than just reducing its width so that it did fit, and I'll just show you what that is. I think you'll understand that we've reduced the width by the depth of both of these rebates in the sides. So creating a rebate along the length of the side that looks like the one on the end will allow the base of the box to sit into the bottom, and it will now be the right size. To create the rebate, take your marking gauge, and if you haven't used it since you last made these rebates, it'll already be set to the right distance, and just scribe along the bottom of the sides from the one rebate at the end to the other rebate. Once you've done that for both sides, reset the marking gauge for the thickness of the base. And then we scribe on the inside of the sides at the edge where the base is going to go, and then it's simply a case of sawing out this corner. If you've built the bench hook, here's an opportunity to use it. It's a rather unconventional way. You normally be cutting cross grain on a bench hook, but on the small components like this we can cut with the grain. And for this cut, you just need to cut down until you reach the rebates on each end. That's when you know you've got far enough. With such a big cut, it's worth taking the saw out and clearing out the teeth, because we're not going far enough through to allow all the waste to come out. Cutting into the thickness is a little more tricky, and you might find it easier to clamp it to the side of the bench to do this, or you can still try with the hook. With such a long cut like this, you're bound to need a little bit of a clean up with a chisel. But it may be just as simple as scraping the chisel along the saw cut into the corner. As you can see, the base fits in there nicely. Let's just do the other one and then we can put the box together. So now we can assemble a base with the two sides and the two ends. So not only does it look better with thinner end grain on the ends of the box, but we've got a nicely fitted base in there as well, and it feels a lot stronger. There's a lot more glue surface area on that box now, and it's quite sturdy. Now you'll be used to me telling you that this box still has problems. Problem now is the base, with its grain running in this direction, will expand and contract more in this direction than the ends whose grain are in that direction, and therefore it could, if it expanded enough, blow the sides away from the end. We'll take a look at dealing with that in another couple of episodes. Initial flattening and assessment of the back can be done on some coarse sandpaper clamped to a flat surface, and you just rub it backwards and forwards with plenty of pressure, evenly distributed across the back of the blade. And you'll start to see the bright spots appear. And now I can see some light scratches appearing right through the middle, so that's flat enough. I'll move over to a finer paper just to polish it a bit more. I'm working on a much finer paper now, and we'll be able to bring a little bit of a polish to the back, gradually reducing the deep scoring we got from the coarse paper down to very fine striations from this fine paper. And that looks pretty good. If you have an oil stone or a water stone, now would be a good time to take the flattened back and just give it a bit of a polish on the stone. And go from end to end or across. Just make sure you use all the stone, and it will help you to keep it flat. Now we've flattened the back, we can see that there are some pretty bad areas of pitting. Whenever that occurs, if the edge of the blade gets to that point, then we're going to have an area where we can't sharpen properly. But we'll go through the sharpening process with this chisel and see what we can achieve. It's not too bad up where the edge is at the moment, so we should be able to get a reasonably good edge on it. The next thing is to grind the bevel, and we can do that on the sandpaper again. I have no hesitation in recommending a very simple honing guide like this. It will probably cost you around £5, and it will help you to get the right angles for your chisels. But you don't need one, you can use a protractor to estimate what the angle is. And what we really want to do on most chisels would be to grind a primary bevel on there at about 25 degrees. That's roughly like that. So if you're able to just do it by hand, holding that angle all the time and working backwards and forwards on the sandpaper, you'll soon start to see that you're grinding a new surface on that bevel that's there already. We want to continue to work on that bevel until we can feel a little burr on the back, so a little bit of resistance when you drag it across your fingertip. If you choose to use a guide, then with the wheel down, you also put the bevel of the chisel down, lay it in there and tighten up, and the amount of blade that sticks out from the front of the guide will determine what the angle is ground on the bevel. These jigs normally say on the side how much of the blade should it be exposed from the end to get the particular angles that you want. And the roller just rolls on the paper behind the bevel. And just helps with consistency. And what it will also allow you to do is you can lay a long sheet of sandpaper out, and you can take much longer strokes, and that's a lot easier actually. Depending on the state of your chisel, it might take quite a long time. This is still very blunt at the moment, so I've still got a lot more work to do. I've reached a point where I've got a burr right along the edge. I've reset it in the jig, just pulled it back a little bit so it's a steeper angle, and I'm working on some fine paper now to produce a little micro bevel on the front. That's just a little section at the front that's a little bit steeper, honed, and it just brings it to a nice polished edge. You should be able to see now where towards the heel of the bevel there are coarser scratches in it from the coarser sandpaper, but nearer the edge, right to the edge, it's much more polished, working on the finer sandpaper. Now we can either go to very fine wet and dry paper to give that little edge a really good polish, or we can go onto an oil stone or a water stone, fine water stone if we've got one. If you put the heel of the bevel down onto the stone, lift the blade up, you should feel first of all where it rests on the primary bevel, and then if you lift it a little bit more, you'll feel the secondary bevel. Then if you can lock that angle, then want to just move it on the stone either in circles or backwards and forwards, just to polish that micro bevel. And you may be able to see it's almost like a mirror finish right on the end. But we still have a burr on this back side, so we just need to polish that out on the stone again by dragging it flat across the stone with the burr starting off and then pulling it on, and that will help to break that burr off. That's gone. Let's check the primary bevel, see if they've rubbed the burr over. And I can feel it a little bit, but I should be able to break that off with just a few strokes. on either side. Now I've prepared this blade at a 25-degree primary bevel, probably 28-29 degrees for the secondary bevel, and that will work much better with softwoods like this piece of pine.